Good evening, everyone. Welcome to a new year of American Strings, and welcome new moment of all kinds of things. I'm Larry Rogers. I'm Dean of the College of Liberal Arts here at Oregon State, and I'm so pleased to have all of you join us for another remote installment of American Strings. Welcome from wherever you're tuning in, whether it's in Oregon or across the country, for a great evening with Bob Santelli and tonight's special guest, Don Flemons. You know, more than once when I've introduced American Strings, I've acknowledged the challenges that I think we're all facing in the moment. It's been a rough year for everyone since the last March, and too many people have left us because of this horrible, horrible virus. But let's go the other way for a moment. You know, nearly every Zoom meeting I was in today, and, believe me, I'm in a lot of Zoom meetings, everyone wanted to talk about the remarkable young woman, Amanda Gorman, our youth poet laureate who read her poem at the inauguration. And when I'm not being a dean, I'm an English professor who teaches American poetry. So I tell you, that really did my heart proud. But more than that, it tells me that not only in the darkest of times, but in the best of times, what sustains us is art, theater, in today's case, poetry. It's what we turn to in the most important moments. And of course, we turn to music. Listening to music in the pandemic, I have to say, has been one of the greatest respites from the troubles of the world for lots of us. But tonight, how about instead of a respite, it can be a celebration of a new and better world? You know, like the power of poetry, the power of music is unstoppable. When American Strings is live at the Majestic Theater, we consistently sell out there. It holds 300 people. And as I've said many times before, there aren't many silver linings to the current state of things, but maybe giving more people the opportunity to enjoy music from home is one of them. Welcome to our loyal American Strings audience. You've grown with us as the series has developed, and we're glad you're here. And we have lots of first-time remote viewers as well. You're in for a treat that's both educational and terrific entertainment. In a moment, I'll let Bob Santelli tell you about that format. We're committed to keeping these concerts free as always, as a kind of quarantine gift to our OSU community and friends. All you'll need to do is keep registering. There's no limit to our audience size. So if you enjoy the music and the conversation tonight, pass the word on. Times are financially tough at the university, so I want to assure folks that all costs are coming from some of our prized arts endowments, housed in the OSU Foundation and funded by our most generous donors, which means that we're not relying on tapping into any operating expenses, no student tuitions being used. We're making it work for everybody. If you'd like to support students, faculty, and great programs like this, consider a gift to the CLA Dean's Fund for Excellence at the osufoundation.org and designate where you want the funds to go. Where you want them to go is where we're going to put them for you. And now, to Bob Santelli. He's OSU's and the College of Liberal Arts University Director of Popular Music and Performing Arts. He's the founding executive director of the Grammy Museum in LA, with connections to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and Seattle's Experience Music Project Museum. And he'll give us a fantastic hour of entertainment with our guest, Don Flemons, I promise. Here's Bob to kick things off.
Thank you, Larry, and welcome all to yet another, what I hope is a very exciting and rewarding evening of American Strings music on this very important day in American history, this inauguration, which, as Larry Rogers just alluded to, was really something special. I hope you caught it. And I think tonight we'll dedicate American Strings to the inauguration and to our new president and vice president. And I'm sure that if they had the opportunity, they'd be tuning into. Anyway, look, for those of you who have never been to American Strings, let me just give you a quick idea as to what you should expect for the next hour. It's really it's not a concert. It's something that really has two parts to it. The first part is a conversation between myself and Dom. And what we'll do is we'll talk about the music that he makes, the music that inspires him, the manner by which he picks the music to write and record, and a little bit more about American music, the traditional form of American music. And when he's finished, then I'll turn the program over to him, and he will take us away with a half hour or so of music that we had just discussed. Okay, so that's pretty much the game plan. I hope you enjoy it. And I am so very much looking forward to chatting and then especially hearing Dom Flemons. So, Dom, welcome to American Strings.
Thank you so much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here with you all virtually, and all you OSU folks and everybody at American Strings. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Well, we're happy to have you. And, before we start, I have to tell a little story because for those who have been to American Strings now for the past, 3 or 4 years, we've been doing this. People always ask me, wow, where did the idea come from? And I'm always too much in a hurry to explain to them. But this man that I'm talking to right now is the inspiration behind American Strings. Here's why. Yeah, that's true. In 2015, the Grammy Museum created a tribute to Leadbelly, the great American songster and folk singer Leadbelly. And we needed a host. We had many artists from Robert Plant and Alison Krauss on down who performed that evening, sold out show at the Kennedy Center. And we asked Dom to be the MC and host. And after that show, so many people had come up to me and said what a delight Dom was as a host, so knowledgeable about American music and about Leadbelly that he just elevated the show. And at that point, Dom, I thought, wow, we should do a program like this. I'll call it American Strings. So here, finally, you are to officially bless our show with your presence and to finally become a part of it. So thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you so much, Bob. It's a pleasure. And I'd also would love to let everybody know that Bob was producing the wonderful Leadbelly Smithsonian Folkways collection, which came out right around the same time. And then now just recently, he's won a Grammy with the Pete Seeger box set along the same line. And, a lot of the work that folks like yourself, Bob, as well as folks like Jeff Place, who is also on the production team, it just, you guys have been amazing advocates for the music, and part of why I can be here today is from the work that you all have done.
Well, thank you.
I
I appreciate that, and I see your Grammy up there on off your right shoulder there.
Oh yeah, yeah, that old thing. Yeah, and
what I heard. Now you have to tell me if this is true or not. There was something special about that evening as well, that Leadbelly evening at the Kennedy Center. What was that?
Well, later that night, one thing that is a special commemorative souvenir for me is that, everybody got a copy of the box set, and I decided to go around with a Sharpie and get everyone to sign it. So all of the performers, except Alison Krauss, she ended up ducking out the back door too fast, and I couldn't get with her. But I got all of them to sign, and Robert Plant then invited everybody out to a wonderful restaurant afterward, and we had drinks to celebrate the evening. And later that night, I actually met who's now my wife. We have a 2.5-year-old daughter now. But that was the night that I first met her. And we didn't go on a date. We went on a date several weeks later. And it changed the course of my life as it had been up to that point.
Wow, that's great. Okay, belated congratulations. I'm glad we could have played a part in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Leadbelly has always been called a songster, and you have the title American songster as well. For the sake of the audience, for those who are not familiar with the term, how do you define songster? What's a songster?
Well, the first time I became aware of the term songster, it was in a book from the blues scholar Paul Oliver. And in the mid-'80s, he put out a book called Songsters and Saints. And one of the ways he defines the songster is a musician who sings and plays a variety of material for a given community. And at that time, I was trying to find a term that would be different from just saying I was a folk singer or a country singer or a blues singer, because I did a little bit of all of those types of music. And so as I went along, I continued to struggle with figuring out a way to define the variety of material that I naturally brought into my shows. And so I decided to choose the moniker, the American Songster, because it sounded like it sounded about right. The songster was an old term, but I could refashion it in a way that was more akin to the way people listen to music in the 21st century, which is less strict genre lines. And so that was where the notion began. And then over time, I just started using it as a name all the time. And it was I found that the two American songsters that also used that name were Leadbelly, and then John Jackson at one point called himself an American songster too. So it also referenced back to a lot of wonderful musicians who left a mark on in people's hearts as well as their minds with their music. And so I also wanted to liken back to that sort of idea where there's a beautiful interchange between the audience and the artist.
Now, you have been, in addition to being an entertainer, you're a musicologist as well, because through your music and reinterpretations of old songs, standard tunes, you brought the past into the present. Where did that interest in old American roots music come from?
Well, one of my first big introductions came from the History of Rock and Roll documentary that was produced by Quincy Jones years back. I saw it on the television, and I saw the episode on the folk revival, and I saw all these names: Ramblin' Jack Elliott, Richie Havens, Phil Oakes, Bob Dylan. And I wanted to understand more about that music because it had a certain do-it-yourself quality to it that I could appreciate. Maybe a year later, I found an interesting bootleg copy of Murray Lerner's Festival film from 1968. So I had a kind of a bootleg VHS copy of this movie for ages that I got to see Ed and Lonnie Young playing fife and drum music. I got to see Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry. And while I bought the VHS under the impression that I wanted to see more Mike Bloomfield and Bob Dylan, I found myself more interested in some of this old roots music that was presented within that film. And that subsequently led me to finding the beautiful Vanguard records on Newport. And that really started to open up my notion of what folk music was in a general sense. And so in 2005, when I graduated from college, I just sold everything I own and made a beeline straight for North Carolina to see what I could find.
Wow. So prior to the History of Rock and Roll documentary, what were you listening to? What did you grow up to? What was the music like in your house?
Well, my folks liked a lot of R&B and jazz, and they had gone to see a lot of folks actually in the Vegas floor shows. My dad told me that he got to see James Brown in 1963 on the floor show in Vegas years back. He had an uncle that used to work at the Golden Nugget, so he got a chance to do that. But on the other side of it, my mom, who was Mexican American, but she grew up in a middle-class Black family. She saw the Moonglows, and she used to see, no, not the Moonglows. She used to see the Mills Brothers when they did Glowworm. She used to go see them a whole bunch. And she also saw Gladys Knight in the Motortown Revue very early on. But by the time I was growing up, they were just listening to regular music, jazz music on the radio, except for my dad. My dad also loved country and Western music, Buck Owens and Hank Williams and Lefty Frizzell. And that was kind of a side passion he had because he grew up in Flagstaff. That was really a lot of my musical upbringing. Most other music I heard was a lot of Cuban jazz, which my mother's mother loved. So, I was familiar with Willie Bobo and Toots Thielemans, and, just I didn't ever play any of this type of music, but I had a lot of people showing me what good music was for them. And that also led into how I try to think of how I interpret songs. I try to interpret songs so that people can like them. Of course, there's artistic merit, and you can make music that is enjoyable without pandering. But I've always tried to balance that level between keeping it straight entertainment and keeping the education in the forefront at the same time.
Some of the songs that you interpret or reinterpret are a century old. How do you make sure that the music that you record and music that you perform in concert is relevant to young audiences that, never heard these songs before? How do you make it relevant for them?
Well, I think there's a couple of different ways that I've gone about it in my career. One of the ways is by doing what they've done for hundreds of years, which is just go ahead and do it no matter what, and just plow right through what modernity thinks is relevant. Because sometimes that in of itself has a power, just because in our modern age with our modern ways of thinking, we can sometimes forget that people that had a much simpler way of living created music that was very worthwhile, and poetry that was very worthwhile too. And I was glad Larry mentioned about poetry, because that was also a part of my background. I did slam poetry and performed in two different national poetry slams in 2002 and three in from the Northern Arizona team. And so I have an interest in literature in that way. It's so much so that it led me to go into my own liberal arts degree, and I studied every ancient type of literature I could find, from Beowulf to Chaucer down to Shakespeare and all the way through. So when I begin to interpret folk songs, I tend to go into a much more linguistic and forensic point of view, trying to find where characters are coming from. So if I'm singing a song that's 100 years old, I at least try to get a sense of where the narrator is coming from, and either the characters, whether they're themselves, or sometimes they tend to use a lot of third person when you sing a lot of songs from the 1890s up to the 20s. I always try to think about real people and real places and real events that happen. So that's one way of going about it. Another way is writing songs that are in the style. So the completely new songs that are original by me, but they sound like a forgotten record. And I always love to try to do songs like that, where you can just show people that the vocabulary is just as poignant as it was in the past. And I guess those are my two main ways I handle a lot of linguistic and as well as interpretive stances on music, because I always hate to think something is too modern or too watered down, because those are too old of conversations, I think, to put onto music that we can access all the versions of any version of a song.
Yeah. Well, I think in your line of work, authenticity is a big, big, important theme. You need to be authentic to the music, to the origins of the music, to the people who made it, to the era. There's a lot riding on your shoulders when you bring songs out from the past and bring them forth to the present, especially since you're basically acting as a disc jockey or a teacher to a whole new generation of these great American songs.
Yeah, without a doubt. It's sort of an interesting spot where you have to find where there's the entertainment value of how far the music can go, but then also, of course, as you mentioned before, authenticity is a key element. Like when I first started playing and becoming a professional out of Arizona, I didn't really think much about how the songs came together. But once I went to North Carolina, I began to meet and talk with a lot more tradition bearers that gave me a stronger sense of how to keep the music right here in the heart and never to lose that within your soul. And if you don't bend from the heart and soul, then the music usually it'll reveal itself of how it needs to be. Either the tune can't rise if the elements aren't correct. I remember sitting with my old mentor Joe Thompson many times, and I could always gauge if the band was playing right, if the tune was 5 minutes long compared to 30 seconds long. Because Joe didn't necessarily go out of his way to say, okay, we're playing it wrong, start over, but he would play it real short if it was not up to his standard. But then we would get a longer pass at it if we happened to hit the wave of whatever it is or was. And that's sometimes how music can be. I always hate to try to make it too tangible, because even if we explain everything we can about music, there's always some unknown element that makes it so beautiful and magical.
I know you grew up in Arizona, and your journey back east to the Carolinas kind of reminds me of what happened in the early 1960s to a guy by the name of Bob Zimmerman, who changed his name to Bob Dylan. Bob, of course, headed east as well. He went to New York City to find Woody Guthrie and pay his tributes to his mentor. What you do, you go a little bit farther south, you go to the Carolinas, and you begin that same kind of journey, which ultimately leads you to the creation of a group that was real. When the Carolina Chocolate Drops came out, I remember, even though the sound seemed traditional and was traditional, of course, it sounded so fresh, so exciting, so new. And of course, I see that Grammy behind you, and that's from the Carolina Chocolate Drops. It was a group that was so right for its time and really introduced a whole new generation of young people to traditional music. Explain how the Carolina Chocolate Drops formed and what was the basis behind it.
Absolutely, yeah. In 2005, I was invited to an event called the Black Banjo Gathering by a fellow named Sule Greg Wilson. And so this event was one of the first academic events dedicated to bringing together the story of Black banjo and all of its facets, meaning African banjo, Caribbean banjo, American banjo, pre-Civil War, post-Civil War, slave banjo compared to banjo in the house, post-Reconstructionist banjo, and the way that it evolved into a parlor instrument for the classical stage, all the way forward. There are about 10, 12 different uh, factions that came together in this single event. And I was one of the young banjo players that had been discovered. Sule found me in my local Phoenix folk scene, and he invited me to come down. And so I was just one of the enthusiastic parties that was invited to just take it in. And when I took all of that knowledge in, and I saw that there was a need for an expansion of black string bands in a general sense, I just sold everything I owned and I moved to North Carolina. Like I said before, I guess I can't help but say I was inspired by guys like Bob Dylan, where in Phoenix there wasn't really anywhere to busk, and so when I first read about Dylan busking everywhere, I found it really hard to do in Arizona. So then I hitched that car ride out to North Carolina, and I found that the blocks were smaller. You could actually walk from one place to the other much easier than before. And so as I landed into North Carolina, of course, before I left the gathering, I met Rhiannon Giddens, and later on I met Justin Robinson, and we started to sit with a fellow named Joe Thompson, who I mentioned beforehand. So at the gathering, one of the elder players was Joe Thompson, who was an African American fiddler who had begun recording in the early 1970s. And he was one of the last tradition bearers for his own family tradition in Mebane, North Carolina, which is kind of west of Durham, just a little bit. And when we started to work with him, the three of us, Justin, Rhiannon, and myself, we found that we were able to create a unique sound with Joe. But then once we left the jam sessions and played on our own, we found that we had our own unique sound as the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And so with the Chocolate Drops, we just took it to the limit. We went to see how far it could go. And of course, I was drawn to the notion that we could actually create more. We could create a bigger space for African American representation in country music, old time music, and then also we could create a little bit of room for country music within blues and jazz, because there were certain aspects that, you know, every genre has its own school of thought. And in a world before we have Google and some of the search tools and engines we have now, to create a new school of thought is a big notion. And so the Carolina Chocolate Drops created a new school of thought for Black Afro-Americana type music. And this has included people like Leadbelly. I thought about people like Leadbelly or Mance Lipscomb, Josh White Sr., Lonnie Johnson, Papa Charlie Jackson. These are all performers that, when you lay out their careers, they're so multifaceted. But because of the way that the genres are laid out naturally, because of course there is racism in the genres, how they were created, systematic racism, but at the same time, human beings like to categorize things. And once we get to a certain point, music is a commodity that, if not categorized, there's a lot of trouble that can come from not having enough categorization. So there are some major places where the industry had overlooked African American string bands, because I just don't think there was anywhere reason for anybody to look for it. And so once I realized that I had the notion, as well as the small cohort of people that came together at that gathering, I brought that into the Carolina Chocolate Drops. And so our string band sound was not just the normal type of fiddle and banjo music. It also featured jug band music, which I brought in, fife and drum, blues, ragtime, and a little bit of just a little variety. So I was always searching for that third element to create that bigger sound that would modernize the group in its own way. Excuse me. It modernized the group in its own type of way.
You know, you mentioned the banjo, and you should know, and longtime attendees of American Strings, if you go all the way back to the very, very first American Strings program we did at the Majestic Theater in downtown Corvallis, was none other than Tony Trischka. who I know you know, and we had a wonderful time with the banjo and him explaining and, of course, performing this great American instrument, which, of course, has African origins. When you when you started to get deeply involved in this music, you became eventually, and the question is how, a multi instrumentalist. I mean, you play a number of different traditional instruments. How did you have time to learn them all very well, like you do?
Well, I was very fortunate in a lot of ways. When I was 16, I started to learn to play the guitar and the harmonica. But I guess no, but I guess 4 or 5 years before that, I started to play percussion in the concert band, and in high school, I played in a four-drum marching band. So, I guess around my junior year in high school, I started to play the guitar. But I always treated the guitar like a rhythmic instrument and a percussion instrument, which is also what drew me to the sound of the banjo when I eventually got myself a banjo. I love the fact that you could get three or four different drums out of a stringed instrument while still holding a melody. Because, of course, as a drummer, you're never spending your time looking at a melody. You might spend your time thinking about a melody when you're playing your rhythms, but you're not creating a melody. And so I was always intrigued by the guitar because of that fact alone. And then at the same time, I had a lot of time at those libraries. So I go to the songbooks, and when I found the big fat book of the Beatles songs, or anybody, or there's the Ultimate Guitar Player, there any number of things that you could find in the library. This is also a fun thing too for me because as in those early years before 2005, you really had to go to every single place to find anything. If you wanted a songbook, you had to call every store in town to see who had it and things like that. So that was how I spent a lot of that time, was just going to each of those stores and trying to find that next sound, that next recording, or the lost recording that I had not heard before. Such as when I first heard the music of Ma Rainey, for example. I heard one song by her called the Black Eyed Blues, and I was so drawn to that one song that I went all the way up and down, and I had to go to Prescott to find a LP of all of Ma Rainey's material because I had to call them, and they couldn't just mail it to me. I had to go to them and get it. So it was, I'm used to digging in the stacks, and that was something I did for a long time. And then once I was in North Carolina, I got to almost turn my energies into a documentarian's role when I began to work with the wonderful Music Maker Relief Foundation, which is a wonderful nonprofit organization that works for benefiting the health of Southern artists. And so when I started to work with them, I started to understand how to interact with older people that had these wonderful stories in their minds and in their hearts and in their hands. And I began to start to try to communicate in that way. And that led me to a different realization of how the music heals and helps people. Even when people have been in the worst oppression of all time, songs are one of the places that they can go to find a temporary escape.
Yeah.
Only if only to find the enjoyment of knowing that they weren't alone. And that's one thing that I think about a song like John Henry all the time. I'll probably try to play a little bit of John Henry on the banjo. John Henry is one of the most documented folk songs of all time. But I always question people with this. Have you ever seen a white John Henry, a non-black John Henry? And when you think of the people that have sung this song for hundreds of years, there's something to be said about the story about a black railroad worker who has to fight against a machine, and he dies trying to do it, and he does it for the love of his fellow human beings. A man ain't nothing but a man. It's a powerful sentiment, and that's kind of where folk songs have always interested me. I've always found something amazing.
Before I let you pick up an instrument and play us a few songs, on occasion, during interviews with authors, an author might be presented with a question like, well, if you had a dinner party, who would you like around the table, right? I'm not going to have a dinner party. I was going to say, let's just say you are a concert promoter. Who would you pick from the past to come up and play some songs live in concert for Don Flemons, the concert promoter?
Well, I mean, since we've been talking about Lead Belly, let's just go ahead and get Lead out there. Charlie Patton could meet him. I would love it if then we could probably get a jazz band. We could just get the Hot Five out there, get Johnny Dodds and Louie and Lil and everybody, and if we go for it, we'll just get King Oliver back there, back in Louie like he used to, and let's see who else we could get in there. We could probably get some Grand Ole Opry members to hang around, the Crook Brothers and Uncle Dave. Yeah, and maybe the Delmore brothers. We'll make sure that they're up front, and that'd be a beautiful thing. It'd be quite an orchestra if we got them all together, Bob.
It would. Sounds like a festival instead of a concert, but that's
Oh,
okay. Well, look, Dom, it was great talking with you, and I know you have a few songs for us, so I'm going to turn it over to you, and thanks for being here. We're looking forward to hearing what you have to play for us.
Well, thank you so much, Bob. Well, I'm going to play this first one on the gourd banjo here, and this has a little family tree of myself, my wife Vania, and our baby Cheyenne Love. And these little birds here are sort of symbolic of the American songster. These are Sankofa birds, and Sankofa is from the Ashanti people off the Gold Coast of Africa, and it's a proverb that means go back and fetch it, grab the things from the past, bring them into the present, and that'll lead you to the future. And so, with that being said, I'll give you a little bit of Steel Driving Man. This is how Joe Thompson used to do John Henry. Driving man, don't you see? Died with a hammer in his hand. Died with a hammer in his hand. That's a little bit of the banjo. But let me get you the guitar here. This I was thinking about it as we were talking about my time in North Carolina. This is one here. This is a little bit of some of the best songs known in the Pickers canon here. First one I'll do is a little bit of Elizabeth Cotton, Freight Train. Then I'll go into Etta Baker, who was the Music Maker Relief Foundation artist, and do her version of Railroad Bill. And then I'll do a little bit of Leslie Riddle's Railroad Blues, get some of that Carter family feel. Actually, let me get that pick on here real quick. Take two. And here's a little bit of Etta Baker. Railroad Bill. All right. Now this next one here, I'm going to switch into a different mode here and play one from my Black Cowboys album. This is one that I wrote thinking about all the Pullman porters on the railroad lines. And I started to think about this one after I read the autobiography of one of the famous Black Cowboys of the West, Nat Love. And this is a song called Steel Pony Blues. When you get down to Holbrook, you won't find me there, good Lord, I caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. Caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. 'Cause I caught the steel pony and boys, I'm gonna ride. Getting far too old to follow this here herd, good Lord, I caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. Caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. 'Cause I caught the steel pony and boys, I'm gonna ride. Go ahead and pick one, 6. Now they call me Mr. Flemons, 'cause I'm a pool porter now. Good Lord, I caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. Caught the first thing smoking down the road somewhere. 'Cause I caught my steel pony and boys, I'm gonna ride. Go ahead and get it one time, 6. Now they call me Mr. Flemons, 'cause I done tore that guitar down. Good Lord, I got the first down the road somewhere. I can pick it, I can't sing it. The beauty of live performance, folks. But guitar, go ahead and save me. Woo! Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. Well, now this next one here, I'm gonna turn into another mode of some of my original songwriting. This is one called "Too Long I've Been Gone," and this is one that harkens back to a lot of the way I used to play when I was first starting to play guitar. And this is one that I've been surprised. You know, when you write songs, you just never know where they're going to go, and you don't know who it's going to affect or how it's going to affect them. And I've gotten a lot of great response from veterans who told me that this is a song that they really enjoy. And I kind of wrote this one about being on the road and sort of the isolation that comes from being on the road. Again, even I was in an interview earlier, earlier this week, and someone mentioned to me that they resonated with them thinking about the current self-isolation. And again, I didn't write it thinking about that, but it's one of those things. Just, I'm just so glad I was able to ask people a question or give a statement or whatnot, and it moved them in some way or another, and that makes it worth it all the while. So here's a little bit of Too Long I've Been Gone here, without trying to think too much about it. Don't need no cup of coffee in the morning. I can get up fine. Delia is a pretty girl, but she ain't mine. Take a little trip to the station. I'm bound to go. When I'll see my lover again, I do not know. Too long I've been gone. 4 white walls and a worried mind, that's all I have. That's all. And when I need someone to talk to, I just say, hello wall. Too long I've been gone. 4 winds blow the breeze, wipe my tears away. They say you're fine. But when the world seems so far away, I've got nothing left except my mind. Too long I've been gone. Too long I've been gone. Thank you. Well, much appreciated, Bob. Well, do I have time for one more, you think? Oh, okay, I got time for one short one here. Yeah. No, this is another one from the Black Cowboys album, and this is a song I've just loved forever. I've known this song for about 15 years or more. This is one I first heard on the Classic Blues album on Smithsonian Folkways. This one was originally recorded by Vera Ward Hall, who was one of the great balladeers. One of the great balladeers that John and Alan Lomax recorded way back, as well as Harold Corlander. And this is a song that she sang that she had learned from a fellow named Rich Emerson. And this is one called the Wild Ox Moan. And it's also known as Black Woman, which is what I decided to name it on the Black Cowboys album, because it implied that there was a love interest for our daring cowboy hero in the record. And so he sings this to her. Well, come here, black woman. And see on daddy's knee. Oh, well, I've got something to tell you, pretty mama. Don't you holler, Lordy. Oh, well, I'm going back to Texas. To hear that Wild Ox Moan. me, black woman. I'm gonna drive my bell cow home. If your kitchen feel lonesome, don't your kitchen feel lonesome? When you'll be scared, roll is gone. That's it.
Don, that was terrific. Wow. Great song, great performance, great conversation. I know I speak for everyone who has tuned in for American Strings for this month. Thank you so much for your dedication to American traditional music, to string band music, and to just the whole culture and history of something that so very much represents and symbolizes our country. Thank you. And I'll be catching up with you sometime down the road. And one of these days, once COVID is behind us, we'd love to have you come back to Corvallis, Oregon, and actually do some of those songs in a live setting. What do you say?
Oh, that sounds awesome, Bob. I would love to do it anytime.
Okay. Well, you take care of yourself. Be well until the next time.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.